For historians and serious students of modern history, understanding the rise of Osama bin Laden is not about sensationalism. It is about tracing how ideology, geopolitics, wealth, and global conflict can converge to shape one individual into a figure who alters world events. His story is not merely a biography. It is a case study in how historical forces interact with personal conviction. To truly grasp late 20th and early 21st century global politics, we must examine the environments, influences, and turning points that transformed a quiet, wealthy young man into the architect of one of history's most notorious militant networks. This deep dive is crafted especially for you, ERAFUSION history viewers and fellow history enthusiasts, who want more than surface-level summaries. We're going to unpack the foundations, the catalysts, and the ideological evolution that defined his ascent. Osama bin Laden was born in 1957 in Saudi Arabia to one of the wealthiest families in the region. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, built a construction empire that became deeply tied to the Saudi royal family, giving the family immense wealth and influence. Growing up in such privilege meant Osama had access to elite education, international exposure, and powerful connections from an early age. Yet wealth alone does not explain his trajectory. He was raised in a conservative religious environment shaped by strict interpretations of Islam. Teachers and clerics around him emphasized themes of moral duty, religious struggle, and resistance against perceived corruption. These ideas did not radicalize him immediately, but they planted intellectual seeds that would later grow under the right circumstances. In university, he studied economics and management. But more important than his formal education was his exposure to religious activists and political thinkers. During these years, the Middle East was undergoing intense transformation. Wars, revolutions, and ideological clashes were reshaping the region. For a young man searching for purpose, this turbulent atmosphere offered both direction and justification. The defining catalyst in his transformation came with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. This conflict drew fighters from across the Muslim world who viewed the war as a religious duty to defend fellow Muslims against the invading Soviet Union. Osama did not initially go as a battlefield commander. Instead, he used his wealth and connections to support fighters. He funded recruitment, transportation, and infrastructure projects such as tunnels and supply routes. These activities introduced him to influential militant clerics and strategists, most notably Abdullah Azzam, who became a mentor figure. Under Azzam's influence, Osama began to see armed struggle not merely as a regional conflict, but as a global religious obligation. This ideological shift is crucial for historians to understand. Afghanistan was not just a war zone. It was a training ground for transnational militancy. Networks formed there would later reshape global security dynamics. During this period, Western intelligence agencies, including the CIA, supported Afghan resistance fighters as part of Cold War strategy. While Osama himself was not a direct CIA asset, the broader environment of foreign funding and weapons created conditions that allowed militant networks to flourish. The Afghan War became a convergence point for geopolitics and ideology, and he learned firsthand how global powers could indirectly shape local conflicts. What set him apart from many other volunteers was not battlefield heroism, but organizational skill. He understood logistics, fundraising, and communication, skills inherited from his business-oriented upbringing. In the mid-1980s, he helped establish Maktab al-Khidmat, an organization designed to recruit and support foreign fighters traveling to Afghanistan. This network became a prototype for something much larger. It connected militants from dozens of countries, creating relationships that transcended nationality. For historians, this is one of the most important developments of the era, the emergence of a transnational militant infrastructure. These networks would later enable coordinated operations across continents. The Afghan War also gave him legitimacy. Among fighters, he was seen not just as a wealthy donor, but as someone willing to live in harsh conditions and share risks. Reputation in militant circles is often built through perceived sacrifice, and his willingness to operate in conflict zones elevated his status dramatically. When the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, many fighters returned home. But, Osama's worldview had already changed. He no longer saw conflict as just a local defensive struggle. Instead, he believed a broader confrontation between Islamic societies and global powers was, inevitable. Around this time, he founded Al-Qaeda. Originally, it was conceived as a base of operations for trained militants, but gradually, it evolved into a structured organization with long-term strategic goals. Unlike earlier militant groups that focused on specific national causes, this one envisioned a global movement. Historians often debate whether ideology or circumstance mattered more in this transformation. The evidence honestly suggests a combination of both. His exposure to war radicalized his beliefs, but geopolitical developments really reinforced them. Events in the Middle East during the early 1990s convinced him that Western powers were exerting undue influence in Muslim-majority countries. These perceptions became central to his messaging and recruitment strategy. In the early 1990s, he relocated to Sudan, where he invested in businesses, construction projects, and agricultural ventures. This period is often overlooked, yet it was critical to his rise. Sudan offered relative freedom of movement and the ability to expand his network without constant surveillance. There, he built financial systems that helped sustain his organization. Businesses provided revenue streams, while training camps continued to attract recruits. More importantly, he refined his ideological messaging, framing his cause as a defense against global injustice. Propaganda became, honestly, as important as logistics. International pressure eventually forced Sudan to expel him. But rather than weakening his influence, this expulsion actually elevated his reputation among supporters, who saw him as a persecuted figure standing against powerful nations. For historians, this really demonstrates how political pressure can sometimes amplify rather than suppress extremist narratives. After leaving Sudan, he returned to Afghanistan, which by then was largely controlled by Taliban forces. The alliance between him and the Taliban leadership proved mutually beneficial. They provided protection and territory. He offered financial resources, international contacts, and experienced fighters. This partnership allowed his organization to operate training camps and communication centers with relative security. These facilities became hubs for indoctrination, planning, and networking. By the late 1990s, his group had transformed from a loose network into a structured organization capable of coordinating complex operations. For analysts and historians alike, this phase marks the point when his rise shifted from regional influence to global relevance. Intelligence agencies worldwide began monitoring him more closely, recognizing that his ambitions extended far beyond local conflicts. One of the most important aspects of his ascent was his leadership approach. Unlike traditional commanders who relied solely on hierarchy, he encouraged decentralized cells. This structure made the organization resilient. Even if one branch was disrupted, others could continue operating independently. He also understood symbolism and messaging. Statements were carefully crafted to resonate emotionally with audiences. By framing conflicts in moral and religious terms, he attracted recruits who felt personally invested in his cause. In historical analysis, this demonstrates the power of narrative in mobilizing movements. His wealth played a role as well. Early funding allowed him to operate without immediate dependence on external sponsors. Financial independence meant strategic autonomy, enabling him to pursue long-term objectives rather than short-term gains. By the late 1990s, his name was known internationally. Governments viewed him as a growing threat, while supporters saw him as a defender of their beliefs. This dual perception, villain to some, hero to others, helped cement his influence. Investigations by agencies such as the FBI intensified as evidence mounted linking his network to attacks on international targets. Increased scrutiny, however, did not diminish his stature within militant circles. Instead, it reinforced his narrative of standing against powerful adversaries. For historians, this stage illustrates a recurring pattern. Notoriety can become a recruitment tool. The more attention he received, the more his message spread. Media coverage, political statements, and global debate inadvertently amplified his visibility. No individual rises in isolation. His ascent was made possible by a unique convergence of historical forces. The Cold War created proxy battlefields where foreign fighters could gain combat experience. Political instability across parts of the Middle East and Central Asia provided fertile ground for recruitment. Rapid globalization enabled communication and travel networks that connected supporters across continents. Equally significant was the ideological climate. The late 20th century saw intense debates within Muslim societies about identity, governance, and foreign influence. He positioned himself within these debates as a champion of resistance, tapping into existing frustrations rather than creating them from scratch. Understanding these conditions is essential for historians. Without them, his rise would likely have been impossible. He was not merely a product of personal ambition, he was also a product of his historical moment. Studying his rise offers several valuable insights. First, ideological movements often begin with small networks before expanding rapidly. Second, geopolitical conflicts can unintentionally create environments that nurture future threats. Third, charismatic leadership combined with effective organization can transform fringe groups into influential forces. Perhaps most importantly, his story shows that history is rarely shaped by a single factor. Economic privilege, religious education, war experience, political alliances, and global tensions all intersected to shape his trajectory. Remove any one of these elements, and the outcome might have been very different. For those of us passionate about history, examining the rise of Osama bin Laden is not about fascination with notoriety. It is about understanding how historical forces shape individuals who, in turn, shape the world. His story is a reminder that global events, ideological movements, and personal choices are deeply intertwined. When we analyze figures like him with clarity and context, we gain more than knowledge of the past. We gain tools to interpret the present and anticipate the future. And that, fellow historians and ERAFUSION viewers, is why studying such complex historical figures remains essential. If you found this deep historical breakdown valuable, subscribe to ERAFUSION History. Share this with fellow history enthusiasts and stay curious, because history always has another layer waiting to be uncovered.